Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Traver, I'm the director here at Traver Gallery, and I'm very pleased to be here with Bronson Shonk, who is our featured artist this month with his show Inflorescence. Bronson, this is your first show with the gallery. We're so happy to have you be part of our family now. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you guys for having me, and it's been a whirlwind of a week so far.
It has, yeah. The show opened last week to great celebration. There was a huge crowd in here, and people are really excited about your work, and with good reason.
Yeah, feels good.
Yeah. So we thought we'd just walk through the exhibition together and get a sense of Bronson's work, hear some stories about how you came to do this work, what inspires it, and a little bit about your process.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Do you want to start just by talking about the exhibition title? Because I think it gives a good sort of background about what this work is about.
Yeah, for sure. So Inflorescence, I won't get the exact definition, but essentially it describes the patterns in which flowers branch. And I'm really interested in that idea because all of my work is about this idea of growth and the patterns that things move and grow through life. So you'll notice quite obviously a lot of the work is very much based in these kind of floral growing forms. And for me, that is all about trying to capture things that are moving and changing over time. So to put simply, what I'm doing is I'm painting long exposure images. So take a growing form and paint it on top of itself over and over again at each stage of its development. And all of a sudden what you can do is you can look through that form and you can actually see it in each stage of its development, from seed, sprouting, branching, blooming, blossoming, and then eventually starting to fall apart. And I think that really captures the idea, and then inflorescence, kind of the patterns that these things fall into.
So you had sort of an interesting pathway to this work with a little detour career-wise.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about how that, your background as an artist and what led you to doing this work?
Yeah, maybe we talk about Gossamer Rose for a second too,
sure.
because that kind of plays into it. So, yeah, I had always done art like many people. I did an IB program in International Baccalaureate, which is kind of like AP program in high school. So I had that kind of like studio art background. And I went to college and I studied environmental science and I did a studio art minor. But I really sort of kind of veered off in another direction and I got into working with data sets in the environmental science field. Long story short, that ended up taking me out to Seattle where I got a job at Tableau, and I came out here to work in the analytics field. And I was there for about 4 years, all the while making art on the side until it got to this point where I realized I needed to actually take it more seriously. I was waking up in the morning to make drawings, I was doing it in the afternoon, and at some point I left work to do it.
And your focus at that time really was two-dimensional work, right?
Yeah,
you were
for sure.
doing drawings and paintings primarily.
Yeah. So at that point, really just drawings. I hadn't even touched color at that point. And so doing all these drawings, I sort of built up the courage to actually take it a little more seriously, and I went out and I sought out different artists in Seattle. I went to galleries, I just wanted to learn more. I connected with an artist named Michael Schulteis, and he ended up actually becoming a mentor and helping me get started. So I started working on a second wall in his studio, and then I got my own studio, and this is in the Salty Dog.
And I just am going to point out some of the paintings. Maybe we look at the paintings while we're talking too, just because I think, for context.
Yeah. So it really, when I started doing that, I was just drawing, and he said, okay, you really need to learn to paint. So I started to learn to paint, and it was miserable. Going from doing everything by pen to trying to use a paintbrush, and it was a pen is exact, it's fine, it goes where you want, but a paintbrush is loose, it dribbles, it's a mess, it gets everywhere, it gets in your clothes, and it was like everything that I hated. So I'm working on this for about a year trying to paint, and eventually I just got frustrated and fed up, so I ended up taking a ballpoint pen and just drawing all over this canvas that I had made. A little bit later, I added some paint, I added some water, and what I found was that a little bit of wet paint started to dribble into the actual crevices where I had been drawing. It was kind of like if you were to take this gallery floor, which has all these cracks on it, rub it with paint and then rub it off, and the paint would just be stuck in the cracks.
Right.
And it would highlight that line work. And so for me, this was this like incredible moment, because it was a discovery that I could paint and draw at the same time. I ended up taking X-Acto knives, pottery tools, and I actually just started carving into my surface, staining it with pigment, and then pulling it off. And what you're left with is that vibrant line work in there. And I think for me, that was kind of the bridge of going from being a drawing to painting. So that's where I got started. And my paintings are obviously about layering. And so when I was in high school, I had made these paintings which were plexiglass layered over photographs. And I was always fascinated with, artists are always wanting to actually create physical layers, but you're just stuck on a 2D surface. So by creating these paintings with plexiglass layers, I was able to actually have physical surface to separate things out with. And it started out, like a high schooler would. I wanted to paint like a concert, and I would have the background lights and the stage and then the audience on different layers. But that idea really evolved, and it started to come into this work. So as making these paintings, that was a really natural point or direction to move into, which was layering work. So I started working on plexiglass, eventually got to glass. But to bring it back to this piece and why I wanted to talk about this in terms of that story was, as I was starting, I had the studio, and Michael would come to my studio every few weeks, and he would come look at paintings. And it was this kind of mentor-mentee relationship. He would spend a little bit, I would stand in the back, and he would look at all the paintings, and it would be silent, maybe for a minute or 2 or 5 minutes, and I'd be kind of like, okay. Eventually he would look at me, and he would do something like this. He'd find like a mark on the wall, and he'd say, "Bronson, this is your best mark." And I'm like, okay. But he was really pushing me, and he pushed me in a lot of really good directions, and he helped me evolve. And one of the things that he kept saying when he came to my studio was, he said, "Your work is gossamer, and you have to explore that idea." And so this piece is titled Gossamer Rose. And gossamer, when you think of gossamer, you think of like spider webs, like translucency, and that was really the focus.
Wings.
Yeah. And so this is really just a study of that idea and that name, and a little bit of an ode to him. If you look at it, you can look at it in different ways, but one of the ideas is that it's the cross-section of a rose painted on each layer, really, really transparently. You'll actually be able to see through the entire thing, almost into the heart of the form.
It's incredible. As we live with a show here in the gallery, we kind of develop a language to be able to talk about it. And the best way I've been able to kind of describe this to folks who maybe aren't here in person to see the work is dimensional painting, right? Like you're creating this voluminous space within these, blocks of glass. It's really incredible. This like totally transparent thing is transformed by these layers of painting. It's really quite beautiful. The piece behind us here, this autumnal arrangement, is so active, right? Like you see all of the, like a front layer, a back layer, and all the layers in between in this dynamic way.
Yeah, and this piece, along with a few others here, were very much like turning points in making the work for this show. You actually came to my studio early on, and you got to see these. And I was talking to you about this idea that they were like these stepping stones for me. Because I had just been working really in monochromes, and it was just big leap. It's really scary to take chances when you're working on glass, and it's such an expensive adventure to go on. So you want to like slowly do it. But these were the first ones that I really went into and started adding multiple different colors and actually getting a lot more color theory in there, which was really exciting.
Well, let's keep walking and take a look at some more pieces while we're talking. It's fun to see the work in the window here, I think, because it gives such a sense of how these pieces can change in different environments, how responsive they are to the architecture, the view around them.
Yeah.
You know, right now in the gallery we have these beautiful green trees. We also have the cityscape. You know, it's sunny weather here in Seattle today, and the way they work in an environment is so compelling.
Yeah, really. I mean, I think one of the first videos I sent you to was of this piece specifically, and what you get at different points of the day, what my favorite thing is when you get this beam of light that comes through and you can watch it as it gets closer and then it hits it and the whole thing just like literally comes alive. Yeah, one of my favorite parts about these pieces is how they change throughout the day and with different light.
Do you want to talk a little bit about technique? I think, you know, obviously coming from painting, you're utilizing a lot of your painting skills here. But these are pretty challenging pieces to make, and there was a lot of problem solving that you had to do along the way to figure that out, how to actually realize this. Can you share a little bit about that process?
For sure. I guess there's two parts to that. One is how to actually build them and get these pieces of glass together, and then the other part is just a note on kind of the actual painting technique, which is we talked about the drawing and the paintings and the carving, and I'm actually drawing and carving in these pieces as well. As you get closer, you'll see that there's all of this line work in there, and that's done with a Dremel tool, and that same concept of putting paint on and taking it off so that it's stuck in the abrasions. As far as actually creating these massive blocks, it started with plexiglass, and it started with watching YouTube videos and calling people, because there really isn't a whole lot of other people who do it. There's a few artists. There's Dustin Yellen who does it. There's Wilfried Grutens, David Spriggs, Isabel Alonso Vega in Spain. And so there's not a whole lot of examples of it. And so, you know, I would try all these different resins and glues and try to put them together. Eventually I figured out how to do it with plexiglass, and I did a series in plexiglass. But I just kept coming back to them, and there was something about them that wasn't doing it for me. I wanted them to be in a different type of material that I kind of connected with more. So I started looking at glass as an option. That's when I met John Kiley, one of your artists, and John, I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I'm trying to do this. You look like somebody who works with glass. Could you help me out? And so he was really, really gracious and helped me out with some ideas and pointed me in some really good directions. And yeah, you know, without those help from him and other people, I definitely wouldn't have been able to figure this out.
So what are you doing in terms of the actual glass process? So how do you get these pieces to be so, you know, layers of glass laminated together, yet they're totally transparent?
Yeah. So it starts, I describe it to people like I'm working on a book or reading a book. All the layers are stacked on top of each other with spacers in between them. And I'll flip back and forth, forward and backwards, and that's why these have forward and backward compositions. You can look at them from either way. Once they're done being painted, so it all gets worked on at once the composition is finished, then it goes through this really intensive cleaning process, and then it gets stacked into this jig that I have built. And a lot of other things happen that I can't really tell you about because it's a little bit proprietary. But eventually, a resin is poured into it, and it fills up all the space in between the glass. Once that sets, then it goes to a cold worker who grinds and polishes it and makes the sides totally flat and transparent. Wow. But yeah, it's a complex endeavor.
Yeah, having seen the jig setup at your studio, I can attest to that. It's not a simple process at all. Let's take a look at a couple of the pieces up front here.
So this piece, heliotrope. Heliotrope is how plants move towards the sunlight in the direction that they'll grow. And I think of that in the way that I paint. So let me explain that a little further. A plant will grow in the direction of sunlight, right? So if you wanted to predict the direction it grows, you look where the sunlight is, and it will grow towards that. If you think about a painting, you could look at it in a similar way, right? If you were to start with a particular color, say red, What that means is there are actually some natural routes that your painting would go. So if you look at color theory, a complementary color of red would be green. So there's a good chance you could then put a green down later in the painting. Or you could look at more of an analogous color scheme, and you could say, okay, from red I could go towards orange, or from red I could go towards violet. And so that's something that I think about in the painting, is how to naturally grow the painting rather than trying to just like create from scratch. There really are these natural paths that things can happen. And the same goes, I think, with balance too. You put one form over here, you start to think about how to balance that form, and things sort of really naturally build on top of each other.
How do you, just hearing you just talk about that, and knowing your background that you discussed earlier, and like doing sort of data sciences and analytics, how do you think art, like, and that sort of analytical thinking work together for you? Is there?
Yeah.
It's just it's not something that I commonly see in art. I mean, there's a handful of artists that we work with that I think that is true for, but it's just curious, like, is that do they balance each other out in a way, or does one force you to get out of a way of thinking?
Yeah. I definitely won't be able to just answer that question, but I can give you some thoughts. I definitely think they balance each other out. I know I've always heard that, especially for musicians, like people who are good at math also tend to be good at music. And I think, when I was actually, like, when I went to work in analytics and started working with data, one of the things that I would tell people, they asked, why are you interested in this? Was because I told them it uses my brain the same way that art does. Like making a painting, kind of going from scratch, like taking something that's nothing and trying to create something with it that tells this visual story. I find that actually quite similar to what I was doing with data, which was you would take a data set and there's a story in there. It tells something about humans' effect on the environment. It tells something about sales at a company, right? And there's something to actually be found in there and molded and morphed.
Interesting.
That might be the best answer I can possibly give you.
I didn't expect you to be able to give a clear answer. It's just something that is interesting to me. I mean, curious, how do these things influence each other? It clearly influences your work. I love this piece in front of the windows here, and I don't know if that shows up on camera. Sometimes the contrast on the camera is challenging, but the way the green of the trees reads through the piece is really beautiful.
Yeah, this is one of the earlier pieces that I'd worked on in this exhibition. It's called Les Bleuets. I like to call it Les Bleuettes in my American accent, but it's actually the painting title of a Joan Mitchell painting. And it's this massive, I think, 3 or 4 panel painting that she did. And a couple of years ago, I went down to see the Joan Mitchell retrospective at SF MoMA. I paired it with some other things to go down there for, but I ended up spending 3 days at that exhibition and just honestly sitting in front of these paintings. She's one of my favorite painters. She does something with color. She just weaves it together in this way, almost like she is actually weaving, but doing it with pigment, that I find fascinating and that I'm always trying to figure out in my work. And which is actually a big part of these. They're layered. You think of them as like, how do you weave this color together within each layer? So, I titled that after her painting. She's a huge influence on me. Yeah.
I know you're inspired by a few other artists and periods of art. Can you talk about some of your other influences?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm just constantly pulling from different places. Specifically this sculpture right here is really taking from all of these different places. It's taking from some of the pieces, it's taking from different ideas, but specifically we can zoom in on some of it. So this right here, there's another piece in the show called Peonies, and that Peonies piece, in this form at least as well, came from a Japanese woodblock painting by an artist named Tanigami Konan. And it's just this really delicate, beautiful block print of these peonies. And specifically what really, really grabbed me about it was there's this yellow bulb that's being totally washed out, and there's this really, really delicate hint of it in the painting. And I was like, I mean, for me, I was like, this is so perfect for working in glass because I can actually cover it with these transparent layers. And so that's where that form came from. You know, just to call out some others, there's these lavender forms in here, kind of inspired by the jacaranda trees in Mexico City. We create these beautiful lavender canopies over the city. You can see this almond blossom or a cherry blossom growing in the center off a branch here. That's also very much inspired by Japanese paintings. You'll see that as a huge theme and throughout that work. And so, yeah, things are coming from all sorts of different places.
Yeah.
Definitely a love of Japanese art, though, in particular.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Bronson, we are just so thrilled to have your work here in the gallery this month, and I hope that all of you will have a chance to come in and see it in person, and if you can't, I hope this video tour has given you a chance to kind of experience the work in all of its dimensionality and dynamicism, and yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys too. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Okay.